Ever feel like the world needs a little more zen? Less hustle? Well, today we're diving into the story of a man who brought Eastern wisdom to the West like over a century ago, Swami Vivekananda.
And it's interesting because this wasn't just some peaceful philosophical exchange,
Right.
It was a real clash of worldviews happening at a time when America was starting to kind of get curious about Eastern thought.
Yeah, it was a fascinating time for sure. So for this deep dive, you sent over excerpts from Swami Nikhilananda's biography of Vivekananda, specifically Chapter 7, Vedanta in America. And I have to admit, Vedanta, that's one of those terms I've heard but never fully understood.
Good point. Let's clarify that first. Vedanta is one of the major schools of Hindu philosophy. Essentially, it emphasizes the unity of all existence and the idea that our true nature is divine. Vivekananda was a key figure in bringing these ideas to the West.
Okay, that makes sense. And this chapter really highlights Vivekananda's journey, his struggles, his teachings, the unique bond he formed with his disciples, especially at a place called Thousand Island Park. And you even mentioned some encounters with pretty big names like Nikola Tesla.
Yes, he met with many influential figures. But before we get to that, I think it's important to understand what Vivekananda was up against when he first arrived in America. I mean, he was a monk from India, representing a religion most Americans knew very little about.
Right. He really burst onto the scene at the 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago. I can only imagine the pressure of representing Hinduism on such a huge stage.
Absolutely. And immediately after, he became incredibly sought after by lecture bureaus. You'd think he'd be thrilled, right? But he quickly realized they were more interested in him as a novelty act than like a serious teacher.
That's almost comical, but also, I imagine, pretty disheartening. Did he push back against that?
He did. He was very vocal about his discomfort with being treated as a spectacle. There's this anecdote about an advertisement with his picture that reads, "An order by divine right, a model representative of his race, a perfect master of the English language, the sensation of the World's Fair Parliament." It even describes his physical appearance in detail.
Wow, that's so objectifying. And it wasn't just the lecture bureau, right? You mentioned he faced resistance from other groups too.
That's right. Christian missionaries understandably saw him as a threat and tried to convert him. Then there were the freethinkers who questioned his faith and beliefs. And of course, there were always those trying to capitalize on his fame for their own gain.
He must have felt like he was under attack from all sides. How did he cope with all of that?
He had incredible inner strength. Despite all the pressure, he never wavered in his commitment to sharing his message of Vedanta. In fact, he once said, "I stand for truth. Truth will never ally itself with falsehood. Even if all the world should be against me, truth must prevail in the end."
That's a powerful statement. But it sounds like all this public attention wasn't really what he was after.
Exactly. The biography quotes him, writing to the Hale sisters who were close friends expressing his frustrations. He yearns for calm, cool, nice, deep, penetrating, independent, searching thought, a few noble, pure mirrors which will reflect it back. He craved genuine connections, deeper conversations, not superficial fanfare.
So it's interesting that while he was grateful for the platform the Parliament gave him, he struggled with the kind of fame it brought. Would you say this discomfort stemmed more from his spiritual beliefs or his personality?
That's a great question. I think it was a combination of both. His spiritual path emphasized inner peace and self-realization, which conflicted with the constant demands of public life. And on a personal level, he seemed to be someone who genuinely preferred intimate settings where he could engage in profound discussions.
So this struggle with fame really pushed Vivekananda to seek deeper connections, and that's where his interactions with American women become so significant.
Yes, he was struck by their independence, their kindness, and their access to education, which was a stark contrast to what women faced in India at that time.
It's even mentioned in the biography that he wrote, "American women, 100 lives would not be sufficient to pay my deep debt of gratitude to you." That's quite a statement, especially considering the cultural differences of the time.
He truly valued their support and friendship, especially during a period when many others were suspicious of him. It's a beautiful example of how genuine human connection can transcend cultural barriers.
So while he admired the progressiveness of American women, he was also deeply concerned about social injustices both in the West and back in India, particularly the plight of the poor and downtrodden.
Absolutely. He saw compassion and service to others as essential elements of spiritual life. This was a key theme throughout his teachings and writing. For example, he wrote, "Let these people be your God. Think of them, work for them, pray for them incessantly. The Lord will show you the way."
It's like he was constantly challenging people to look beyond themselves, to see the divine in everyone, regardless of social standing.
Exactly. And this compassion extended beyond national borders. He was deeply critical of the caste system in India and advocated for the upliftment of the masses. His work wasn't just about individual enlightenment, it was about social transformation as well.
This makes me wonder, how did he begin to teach Vedanta in a more focused way? Because up to this point, it seems like he was mainly doing lectures and dealing with the ups and downs of public life.
Well, he did find a more structured approach to teaching through the Brooklyn Ethical Association, which was a bit of a turning point for him.
So how did this organization differ from the lecture bureaus that he was struggling with?
The Brooklyn Ethical Association was more focused on philosophical discussions and intellectual exploration. They provided a platform for him to delve deeper into his teachings without the pressure of being a crowd-pleasing performer.
I imagine that must have been a relief for him. Did this lead to him forming his own group of students?
Yes, his lectures at the Brooklyn Ethical Association were so well received that he eventually established his own classes, albeit in a much humbler setting than those grand lecture halls.
So what did those early Vedanta classes look like?
Picture this: Vivekananda sitting on the floor, surrounded by students, perched on whatever furniture they could find. The room was often overflowing with eager listeners.
That's such a stark contrast to the circus-like atmosphere he had experienced before. It sounds like he finally found a space where he could teach authentically and connect with students who were genuinely interested in learning.
It was during this time that he really began to dive deeper into specific teachings like Jnana Yoga and Raja Yoga with a select group of disciples.
I have to confess, Jnana Yoga and Raja Yoga, these are terms I've heard thrown around but never fully understood. Could you break those down for me and for our listeners who might be in the same boat?
Of course. Jnana Yoga is the path of knowledge focusing on self-inquiry and contemplation to realize one's true nature. It's very much about understanding the nature of reality through deep introspection.
So it's more of an intellectual and philosophical approach to achieving spiritual liberation.
Precisely. And then there's Raja Yoga, which focuses on controlling the mind through meditation and ethical discipline.
So if Jnana Yoga is about understanding the mind, Raja Yoga is about mastering it.
You could say that yes. Raja Yoga provides a structured system of practices designed to quiet the mind and gain control over thoughts and emotions.
It sounds like both paths require a lot of dedication and inner work. And during this time, while he was teaching these different approaches, he also wrote his influential book, Raja Yoga, right?
That's right. And the book wasn't just a dry, theoretical explanation of yoga philosophy. It was filled with practical advice and insights, which is why it resonated with so many people, even prominent Western intellectuals like William James.
And I remember you mentioning a fascinating detail about his writing process. Can you tell us more about that?
His disciple, Miss Josephine MacLeod, often described how he would go into these incredibly deep meditative states, sometimes for hours on end, and then suddenly emerge with these bursts of profound insight. And it was her job to capture those insights as quickly as possible.
It must have been an intense experience trying to keep up with such a brilliant and dynamic mind.
It certainly was. But it also speaks to his ability to tap into a deeper level of consciousness, to access wisdom that went beyond the realm of ordinary thinking.
It seems like we're witnessing a major shift in Vivekananda's journey. He's finding his voice as a teacher, connecting with dedicated students, and even making an impact on Western intellectuals. And it's all happening within this very intimate setting, far removed from the frenzy of his initial arrival in America.
Absolutely. And there's another crucial piece of this puzzle that we need to explore, a place called Thousand Island Park, which becomes a sort of spiritual crucible for Vivekananda and his disciples.
I'm really intrigued by this Thousand Island Park. You described it as a transformative period for him and his followers. What happened there? Why was it so significant?
Well, that's where our deep dive continues. Thousand Island Park was more than just a picturesque location. It became a space where Vivekananda could fully embody his role as a spiritual teacher, guiding his disciples on a profound journey of self-discovery.
All right, I'm hooked. Let's head to Thousand Island Park and see what unfolds there.
Let's dive in.
So we left off with Vivekananda finding a rhythm with his teaching in those intimate classes, and now we're stepping into a new setting, Thousand Island Park, which you described as like a pivotal moment for him. What drew him to this place?
Thousand Island Park at that time was a popular summer retreat for wealthy Americans. But for Vivekananda, it offered something much deeper. He was invited there by one of his devoted students, a woman named Miss Sarah Bull, who offered him the use of her family's cottage for the summer.
So it wasn't just the beautiful scenery that attracted him.
Exactly. It provided a quiet, secluded environment away from the distractions of city life, a place where he could fully focus on his spiritual work with a small, dedicated group of disciples.
So he's at Thousand Island Park. What does that look like? Is he delivering big lectures, leading group meditations under the stars?
This is much more intimate than that. He gathered a close circle of 12 disciples, and the dynamic was very much in line with the traditional guru-disciple relationship found in India.
Can you explain that a bit more for listeners who might not be familiar with that kind of spiritual mentorship?
Of course. In the guru-disciple tradition, the guru isn't just a teacher who imparts information. They are a spiritual guide, a mentor who helps the disciple awaken their own inner potential. It's a very deep personal bond.
So it's not just about attending a class, it's about a complete immersion in a certain way of life.
Exactly. And at Thousand Island Park, Vivekananda was really living and breathing his role as a guru, guiding his disciples through intense spiritual practices, emphasizing not just intellectual understanding, but also personal transformation.
I'm picturing a very serious, almost austere environment.
Yeah.
Was it all intense practices and deep philosophical discussions, or were there moments of lightness, of humor, of just being human?
Oh, there were definitely lighter moments. Vivekananda, despite his deep spirituality, had a wonderful sense of humor and a playful nature. The biography mentions how he would sometimes tease his disciples, even doing impressions of people he encountered, like waiters or even fellow spiritual teachers. He could be quite mischievous.
That's nice to hear. It makes him feel more relatable, you know? Like even in the midst of all this intense spiritual work, he never lost his human side.
Exactly. And this playfulness was part of his charm. It helped him connect with people from all walks of life. He could be profound and philosophical one moment and then cracking jokes the next. It was all part of who he was.
So what kind of spiritual practices was he emphasizing with this group of disciples at Thousand Island Park?
He placed a lot of emphasis on meditation, on chanting, and on the importance of living an ethical life. He encouraged them to practice self-control, to cultivate virtues like kindness, compassion, and detachment from material possessions. He was really guiding them on a path of self-realization.
Okay, self-realization, that's another term that gets thrown around a lot. Could you unpack that a bit? What did he mean by that?
In the context of Vedanta, self-realization refers to the process of awakening to our true nature, which is pure consciousness, or what some might call the divine spark within. It's about realizing that we are not simply limited egos, but something much greater interconnected with all of existence.
So it's about going beyond the surface level of our identity and connecting with something much deeper, something universal.
Yes, exactly. And this was the ultimate goal of Vivekananda's teachings, to guide his disciples on this path of self-discovery and liberation.
And was he successful? I mean, did his disciples actually experience these profound shifts in consciousness?
The biography talks about how the atmosphere at Thousand Island Park was incredibly charged, almost electric. It mentions how Vivekananda seemed to be transmitting his spiritual energy to his students, and some of them had profound mystical experiences.
What kind of mystical experiences? Can you give an example?
One disciple, a woman named Miss Waldo, described how during one of his talks, she saw him transformed. She saw his physical form as radiating light, almost translucent. And this wasn't just a fleeting vision. She said it lasted for quite a while.
Wow, that's pretty intense. And it's interesting that this kind of experience happened while he was giving a talk, not during some deep meditation or ritual. It suggests that his very presence was a conduit for spiritual energy.
It does, doesn't it? And this wasn't an isolated incident. There were other accounts of his disciples having visions, experiencing states of deep bliss, even feeling their consciousness expand beyond their physical bodies.
That's fascinating. And it seems like he was almost channeling this energy intentionally or not. But he never framed these experiences as supernatural, right?
Right. He always emphasized that these experiences were natural outcomes of deep spiritual practice, of awakening the latent potential that lies within each of us. He saw them as glimpses into the true nature of reality, not as something magical or otherworldly.
So he wasn't encouraging his students to chase after psychic powers or anything like that. It was all about self-realization, about inner transformation.
Exactly. He actually cautioned his disciples against getting caught up in those kinds of phenomena. He knew that the real work was about purifying the mind, cultivating virtues, and realizing our interconnectedness with all things.
It sounds like a very balanced approach. He's acknowledging these profound experiences, but also grounding them in a framework of ethical conduct and self-development.
Precisely. And this is what sets his teachings apart. It's not just about mystical experiences or intellectual concepts. It's about integrating spirituality into every aspect of our lives.
Okay, so we have Vivekananda living and breathing his role as a spiritual teacher at Thousand Island Park, guiding his disciples on this path of self-realization. But what about his interactions with the outside world? Did he completely withdraw from public life during this time?
Not entirely. He did meet with several notable figures during his time in America, and these encounters provide further insights into his personality and the impact of his teachings.
Okay, who are we talking about?
Well, for example, he had a fascinating exchange with Robert Ingersoll, who was a well-known agnostic orator at the time.
Agnostic meaning he didn't believe in God or any kind of higher power.
Yes, and Ingersoll was actually quite critical of religion in general. But despite their differing viewpoints, they had a deep respect for each other.
That's interesting. What did they talk about?
Well, according to the biography, Ingersoll actually warned Vivekananda about the dangers of intolerance. He argued that his own critiques of traditional religion had unintentionally paved the way for someone like Vivekananda to gain popularity. He was essentially saying that by attacking the old, he had made space for the new.
That's quite a self-aware statement. And it speaks to the complex dynamics at play during that time. America was becoming more open to alternative spiritual ideas, but there was still a lot of resistance from traditional religious institutions.
Absolutely. And this is where Vivekananda's approach was so unique. He didn't engage in debates or try to convert people. He simply presented his teachings in a way that resonated with those who were seeking something more, something beyond the confines of dogma and rigid beliefs.
So he wasn't trying to win arguments or prove anyone wrong. He was just sharing his perspective and allowing people to connect with it if it resonated with them.
Exactly. And this open-minded approach is what allowed him to connect with people from diverse backgrounds, including those who might have been skeptical of religion in general.
Okay, so we have Robert Ingersoll, the agnostic orator. Anyone else who stands out?
He also met Nikola Tesla, the brilliant inventor and engineer.
This is the guy who was obsessed with electricity and alternating current, right?
That's right. And surprisingly, they had quite a bit in common. Both were fascinated by the mysteries of the universe and were seeking to understand the underlying principles that govern reality.
What did they talk about? Did they actually find common ground between Vedantic philosophy and modern science?
The biography suggests that they did. They were both interested in the idea of a universal energy that permeated all things. Tesla was intrigued by the concept of prana, which is the vital life force in yogic philosophy, and saw parallels with his own understanding of electromagnetism.
Wow, that's fascinating. It suggests that these seemingly disparate fields of knowledge, ancient Eastern spirituality and cutting-edge Western science, might actually be converging on similar truths.
It does, doesn't it? And this is something that Vivekananda often emphasized. He saw Vedanta not as a belief system, but as a scientific approach to understanding the nature of reality, one that was ultimately compatible with the discoveries of modern science.
That's a powerful idea. It suggests that there's a deeper unity underlying all knowledge, regardless of cultural or historical context. And it makes me wonder, were there any other notable figures he met during his time in America?
He also had encounters with prominent women in the arts like Sarah Bernhardt, the famous French actress, and Emma Kauv, the renowned opera singer.
I imagine they were drawn to his charisma and his spiritual depth. What kind of impact did he have on them?
Both women were deeply impressed by him. Kauv in particular described him as someone who truly walked with God and shared how his words had a profound impact on her during a time of personal turmoil.
So he wasn't just impacting intellectuals and philosophers, but also artists and performers. It seems like his message really transcended boundaries and touched people from all walks of life.
It certainly did. And it's worth noting that these encounters with famous figures weren't just social calls. They were opportunities for him to share his teachings, to spark curiosity about Eastern philosophy, and to plant seeds of wisdom in unexpected places.
It's like he was weaving this tapestry of connections, using his charisma and his intellect to bridge the gap between East and West, between spirituality and the arts, between ancient wisdom and modern thought.
Exactly. And this ability to connect with people on such a deep level, to inspire them, to make them think differently about the world, is what made Vivekananda such a remarkable figure.
Okay, so alongside these profound conversations with intellectuals and artists, we also have those humorous anecdotes that you mentioned earlier, the ones that remind us that even enlightened beings have a human side.
Oh yes, there are quite a few of those.
Yeah.
For example, the biography mentions an incident where a student asked him if it was true that Hindu mothers throw their babies to crocodiles. His response, "Yes, madam, they threw me in, but like your fabled Jonah, I got out again."
He had a quick wit, didn't he? And I love how he uses a biblical reference to connect with his American audience. It shows his adaptability and his ability to communicate complex ideas in a way that was relatable and even humorous.
It's that blend of wisdom and wit that made him so endearing. He could be profound one moment and then make you laugh the next. It humanized him, made his teachings less intimidating and more accessible.
So we have Vivekananda teaching, writing, influencing intellectuals and artists, and even cracking jokes along the way. But what about his ultimate goal? Was he trying to build an organization, a movement?
Actually, no. He emphasized individual transformation above all else. He once stated, "Individuality is my motto. I have no ambition beyond training individuals."
So it wasn't about creating a following or building a structured institution. It was about empowering individuals to find their own path to liberation.
Precisely. And this focus on personal growth is what makes his message so relevant today in a world that often prioritizes external achievements over inner transformation.
It's a powerful reminder that true fulfillment comes from within, not from external validation or material possessions. But let's be honest, even for someone as spiritually advanced as Vivekananda, navigating America in the late 19th century couldn't have been all sunshine and roses, especially given his race.
That's right. There are accounts of him facing discrimination, even being denied service in certain establishments because he was mistaken for being black.
That's heartbreaking. Imagine coming to America to spread a message of universal love and brotherhood only to be met with such prejudice. It must have been incredibly disheartening.
It was. But what's remarkable is how he responded to these situations. He refused to let bitterness or anger consume him. Instead, he used these experiences as opportunities to demonstrate his unwavering commitment to equality and compassion.
Do you have an example of how he handled such a situation?
Yes, the biography mentions an incident where he was denied service at a barber shop because the barber thought he was black. When asked why he didn't correct the barber and point out that he was Indian, he replied, "What? Rise at the expense of another? I did not come to earth for that."
That's such a powerful statement. It shows that his commitment to equality wasn't just theoretical, it was deeply ingrained in his being. He refused to benefit from a system that oppressed others, even when it meant facing discrimination himself.
His actions spoke louder than words. He embodied the principles he preached, even in the face of adversity.
It's a powerful lesson for all of us. Standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, is a core part of living an authentic and meaningful life. And it's a reminder that true spirituality isn't about escaping the world, but about engaging with it in a way that promotes justice and compassion for all beings.
And that leads us to another crucial aspect of Vivekananda's message: the importance of service, particularly service to those less fortunate.
That's something that's been hinted at throughout our conversation. He clearly had a deep concern for the poor and marginalized. But how did this manifest in his teachings and actions?
Well, that's where we'll continue our deep dive. Vivekananda's call to service wasn't just an abstract ideal. It was a lived experience, a driving force behind his efforts to uplift humanity, both in India and in America.
This is getting really interesting. I'm eager to explore this idea of service, how it connected to his spiritual teachings, and what it might mean for us today.
Let's delve deeper into that now.
So we've been exploring this fascinating journey of Swami Vivekananda's time in America, the challenges, the triumphs, the encounters with all those notable figures. And now we're diving into this theme that seems to be woven throughout his story, the importance of service, particularly service to those in need.
Yes, this wasn't just some abstract concept for Vivekananda. He really saw service to others as a fundamental expression of spirituality, a way to manifest our inherent divinity in the world.
It's interesting because he wasn't just talking about charity or philanthropy in the traditional sense. It's like he was calling for a radical shift in perspective, like a recognition of the inherent worth and dignity of every human being.
Exactly. He often said, "Let these people be your God." Think of them, work for them, pray for them incessantly. The Lord will show you the way. He was challenging people to see that divine spark in everyone, regardless of their social standing, their background, or their circumstances.
And this was a message that resonated so deeply with him on a personal level. We touched on his concern for the plight of the masses in India. Did that concern translate into action?
Absolutely. He was a vocal critic of the caste system, which he saw as a major obstacle to social progress in India. He believed that true spirituality required dismantling these systems of oppression and creating a society where everyone had the opportunity to reach their full potential.
So it wasn't just about individual enlightenment. He saw a direct link between spiritual growth and social justice.
Yes, he believed that true spirituality had to manifest in the world in concrete actions that alleviated suffering and promoted the well-being of all beings.
And he wasn't just talking about this, he was actually putting it into practice, right? Didn't he send a significant portion of his earnings back to India to support various causes?
He did. Even though he was living in America, his heart remained with the people of India. He was constantly thinking about how he could improve their lives, how he could contribute to their upliftment. He organized fundraising efforts, supported educational initiatives, and even inspired his American followers to get involved in social work back in India.
It's incredible how he managed to bridge those two worlds using his platform in America to raise awareness and resources for those in need back in India.
It speaks to his global vision. He didn't see himself as bound by national borders or cultural differences. He was a citizen of the world, a true humanitarian who recognized our shared humanity.
And he didn't shy away from making strong statements about the importance of service. I remember you mentioning a quote where he uses some pretty harsh language.
Yes. He said, "Him I call a Mahatma, a noble soul, whose heart bleeds for the poor. Otherwise, he is a Duratma, a wicked soul."
Those are strong words, and they really underscore his conviction that compassion and service are not optional extras, but essential components of a truly spiritual life.
It's almost like he's saying that our spiritual progress is directly tied to our willingness to serve others, to alleviate suffering, to make the world a more just and equitable place.
And this message feels incredibly relevant today, especially with all the social and economic challenges we're facing globally. It's a reminder that we can't just focus on our own personal well-being. We need to extend that concern outwards to those who are struggling, to those who are marginalized, to those who need our support.
Vivekananda's call to action to feel for the miserable and look up for help is as relevant now as it was over a century ago. It's a challenge to move beyond apathy and complacency, to engage with the world in a meaningful way, to use our talents and resources to make a positive difference.
So, as we come to the end of our deep dive into Vivekananda's life and teachings, what's the key takeaway? What's the one thing you hope our listeners will remember?
For me, it's the idea that spirituality is not an escape from the world, but a call to action. It's about integrating our inner growth with our outer engagement, about using our understanding of the interconnectedness of all things to create a more just and compassionate world.
I love that. It's about finding that balance between personal transformation and social responsibility, between cultivating inner peace and working to alleviate suffering in the world around us. It's about recognizing that true spirituality is not passive, but active, engaged, and transformative. It's about being the change we want to see in the world.
Beautifully put. And I think this is something that Vivekananda embodied so powerfully. He wasn't just a philosopher or a teacher. He was a force of nature, a catalyst for change, who challenged us to expand our understanding of what it means to live a truly spiritual life.
He really was a remarkable individual, and I hope our listeners will be inspired to delve deeper into his teachings, to explore the richness and depth of Vedanta, and to discover how these ancient wisdom traditions can offer guidance and inspiration for navigating the complexities of modern life.
I agree, there's so much to learn from his life and his message, and perhaps by embracing his call to service, by cultivating compassion and understanding, we can each contribute to creating a world that reflects the unity and harmony he so passionately envisioned.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. This has been a truly enriching conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Swami Vivekananda. We hope this exploration has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue seeking knowledge, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of yourselves and the world around you.
I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.